Chasing Giants with Don Higgins and Terry Peer. Brought to you by Osseo Camo, nature's most lethal camouflage. Follow along as Don and Terry discuss the techniques, strategies, and dedication needed to harvest one of God's most amazing creations, world-class whitetails.
Well, welcome everyone to the Chasing Giants podcast, episode 276, I believe. This episode will air on June 8th. Don Higgins, how you doing, buddy?
I'm good. How about you, Terry?
Good. I honestly had one of the most whirlwinds of a week with travel and work, and I know that you had a big week that we're going to dive into, but before we get any further, I forgot to mention this at the beginning of the episode last week and had to splice in something. At the end of this episode that you're listening to right now on audio platforms will be the Joe Miles, Bobby Worthington segment of woodsmanship from the Shipshewana show last February. And those who watch it on YouTube, that will air on Tuesday morning. The video feed will download. So make sure you check out, for those of you listening on the audio platforms and the call-in services like MTech, it will be at the conclusion of this episode. Video will air on Tuesday. If you missed last week's, the Wenzel brothers were on last week. So make sure you go check that out. And then in another week, we'll have you and our good friend Al Foster. So what you had a whirlwind of a week also. You took a big drive out to Ohio. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, on Tuesday, drove to Ohio. My wife and grandson Walker went along and had the seminar out there on Tuesday evening. And then as soon as the seminar was over, we turned around and drove home. So we didn't get home till about 3:30 in the morning. But had a great crowd. There was somewhere around 300 or so people. Just fantastic crowd. We need these, this positive feedback every once in a while. We get bashed, here and there some. And just to, get so much encouragement from others that I got on that trip. And even the next day when I came home, I got some text and phone call from one of our dealers, not the dealer that put on the event, but just another one happened to be there, and just appreciated all those positive comments. And we're going to get into that a little bit more in one of the questions later, but it was so positive, hearing encouragement from all those people that it was a long day for me, but it was well worth it.
Well, we'll save the rest of the discussion for that question that comes up. I think we both have some comments about that probably we might unload on. So get ready for some rants, people. I might get a little fired up. You never know. Let's talk about a food plot update. Tomorrow, this is going to air on Sunday. On Monday, you're going to have a video on the YouTube channel walking through your wildlife orchard that got affected by the fire blight and the doe that's sticking her head up on the fences. And I want to save that because we're going to talk all the way through that a little bit with fire blight. You've learned some other details about fire blight since the last episode of the podcast, and you were at Jay Gingrich's today. So I want to save that segment. So real quick, why don't we both go through an update of what your food plots look like, what the next steps are going to be, and timing of those steps.
Well, my plots actually look really good. They're not as big as they typically would be because it was a little bit later planting date. But my corn looks fantastic. Had one little issue with the corn planter. I had one of the rows on my 4-row planter had a little belt break that feeds the corn through the meter unit, they call it, on that John Deere 7000. Planting corn, but it was very sporadic, and it'd go long distances and miss a kernel. Overall, it just looks great. I mean, I look out the plot behind my house is planted in NutriCrave corn, and I look out there every day, and it just looks fantastic. Totally weed-free. Use the Resicor herbicide, and just a great stand of corn. And there's the other two plots that we're planting the test varieties in, and they look great as well. My soybeans, I mentioned on previous podcasts that I had to replant because I planted too deep the first time. Totally my mistake. And did that replant, and those are coming up good. So got just a little bit of browse pressure, but I got a couple of deer deterrent products that I'm going to spray on. It's been raining here and wet for the last couple of days, so when it dries up, and it's supposed to rain tomorrow again, so probably early next week I'm going to spray some of that deterrent on, along with Mike's Mighty Micros and also the glyphosate to kill the weeds. So I'm going to have all three of those in the sprayer at once. Spray, and I hope that that's the last time I have to spray those beans at all. So overall, they're looking great. I got a new clover plot that Corey and my son-in-law, went and looked at yesterday evening, and it looks absolutely fantastic. I've mowed it twice. It got a little bit out of hand, so the first time I mowed it with my big tractor and the big bush hog mower, and it knocked it down, but it didn't do a real clean job with some of the cutting. And then a week or two later, I went in with my finish mower on my smaller tractor and cleaned things up, and that's been about 10 days or so ago, and it's green back up. It looks absolutely just fantastic, and the deer are feeding in it every day. I've got a trail camera right there in one corner, and they're hitting it every day, so my plots look great.
My corn is up, I'd say, between 8 and 10 inches, so I'm going to spray it with Mike's Mighty Micros this week, because that'll be the last time. I don't have a tractor sprayer. My sprayer's on my side-by-side, which luckily works with 30-inch rows. So I'm going to spray Mike's on that. And then my soybeans aren't quite ready to spray, Don. They're probably about 4 inches tall, but I'm worried if I spray glyphosate in there right now, I might have to spray a second time. So I'm going to let them get a little bit taller before I spray them. I'll probably go ahead and shoot them with Mike's while I have a batch of spray made up, and I'm out there. But I tell you what I need to do. The 11 fruit trees that I planted in my existing clover plot, I didn't spray around the base of them. So it was existing clover that I put trees in. And I want to go back this week, and I'll probably just mix up in a little hand pump sprayer instead of having to worry about cleaning out the big sprayer. But just go out there and spray around the base of it and kill it, so I can get those mulched. I got stuck with some rain, but those who follow me on social media will laugh at me because I had a really big boo-boo this last week. I bought of course, when I got my new tractor, I went up in size. So my bush hog that I had was too small for my new tractor. It was a 3.77 foot, and it covered the rear tires, but not by much. But I went and bought a, tow behind very similar to your big bush hog, and man, it's so nice. That tow behind is so much smoother, cuts better. You can control height. Really like it, but I tell you, I wasn't paying attention, and I went to turn a corner, and when I was mowing that clover, and I ran right over top of a T-post and one of my fences. I didn't get the tree, but I took a picture and fessed up to everybody. I was juggling a phone, and wasn't paying attention. And that 3-point, it swings with you, but the tow behind, it's like pulling a trailer, and I ran right over top of it. So I'm lucky I didn't mow off my fruit tree.
Well, I was playing on my phone today and had something happen that has never happened to me before. I had a employee appreciation luncheon at Green Prairie and Real World, so I was headed up to that, and I'm on my phone trying to return calls and texts and everything else, and driving through open farm country, open fields on both sides of the road, and at the last second I caught a deer run right in front of my truck, and I hit that deer hard and just rolled him into the ditch. And when I looked in my mirror, and there he was laying in the ditch, white belly and legs up in the air, and it looked like a little buck. But never have hit a deer in my life, and hit one this morning because I was jacking around on my phone.
In your new truck?
In my new truck.
Oh.
Didn't hurt it. I mean, it didn't hurt the truck.
Really?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yep.
Well, I'm going to make a little joke here. You mentioned your corn planter broke in that belt. Our Real World dealer, Clint Cross, over at Cross & Sons Planters, ears perked up. So I'm sure you'll be getting a text message real soon about what parts you need to replace those parts on that John Deere planter. So
yeah.
He's a really good friend of ours, good guy. He actually built my corn planter, and I want to tell you what, Young man, very aggressive with what he's doing, hard worker, and we wish him the best. He's a 360 blind dealer, real world dealer, and he builds custom corn planters for people. So Don, you better get your parts from Clint.
Well, I already ordered the parts actually. So I had to take my tractor in. Actually, I called the dealership where I bought my John Deere tractor, and I had a little issue with the PTO shaft. It comes out the back of the tractor, and they came out, and the guy jacked around with it for 2 hours, and then he told me I need to take it to the shop. So I took it to the shop, and basically I ordered the parts through them. So
I gotcha.
they'll be waiting there. But Clint absolutely knows what he's doing with these planters. He knows them inside and out. But yesterday evening, my son-in-law Corey and I tore that planter apart and figured out what the problem is. I should say Corey figured out what the problem is. I was just standing there watching.
Well, Clint, sorry about your luck, buddy. You don't get to sell Don apart. Well, let's take a break for our Osseo spot, and we'll come back. I want to talk about fire blight. And I tell you what, before we go to the break, I don't know if you saw yet, but Chris Yates is almost a Joe Miles. He's over in Africa right now, sticking all kinds of stuff. So if you're on social media, make sure you're following Chris Yates and following this adventure that he's having in Africa. So we'll be right back.
Osseo Gear introduces a premium line of bow hunting gear that is unmatched, pairing nature's finest camouflage with the best technological innovations. Osseo Gear brings whitetail bow hunters the gear they need to be the best at their craft. The unique camouflage mimics the intricate feather pattern of North America's greatest predatory creatures. Designed for invisibility, built for comfort, and engineered for function. Visit OsseoGear.com. That's ASIO Gear.com to start shopping. Osseo Gear. Prepare to be invisible.
Well, Don, the subject of this segment is fire blight. And for those who didn't listen to last week's episode, talk us through what this video that's airing on Monday about your wildlife orchard, what you found. At first, you got real worried that there was something in your sprayer or something in the Mike's Mighty Micros, but you quickly figured out we had fire blight. So talk us through that a little bit, and then the information that you learned this week.
Yeah, so the fire blight hit my orchard. It did not affect any of the gingrich trees, but there were some other trees from another nursery that it did. In fact, not only did it affect them, it killed a bunch of them. I mean, the whole tree is just totally toast. And that's not a knock on the other nursery, because the other nursery puts out some quality stock. So I'm not even going to mention the nursery because I don't want anybody to take it negative, but it's the variety of tree. That's the issue. The fire blight I learned this week from one of my consulting clients. I say all the time, I'm not that smart, but I hang around a lot of smart people. And this particular client has an orchard of over 300 acres. And he had seen my post or something, or maybe it was us talking about it. I don't remember where he's seen it, but he's seen I was having fire blight issue, and he said, I am an expert on fire blight. I may not be an expert on much, but I am an expert on fire blight. And with that 300 acres of orchard, he's got to be on top of it. And he said there's 3 factors that come together for a fire blight outbreak. And first of all, the trees have to be in bloom. It happens, the trees first become infected when they're in bloom. Second, there has to be a rain event. It has to be really damp and wet. And the third thing is heat. It has to be warm when this happens. So the formula that he gave me is that the low temperature for the night and the high temperature for the day, you add them up, and if it's over 120, then it's prime, and the other 2 factors are there, then it's prime conditions for an outbreak of fire blight. And so, for example, let's say the daytime high is 80 degrees and the nighttime low is 50. You add 80 and 50 and you get 130. That's above 120. If you also have a rain event and you've got your trees in bloom, then it's prime for a fire blight outbreak. And the other thing he said is it affects your more vigorous growing trees the worst. I mean, the trees that are, really putting on new growth. Exactly. And that's exactly what I seen. My best, nicest looking trees putting on a foot of new growth out on the ends of those branches. those are the ones that are just toast brown dead today. So I filmed another video today that people can look for on the Chasing Giants TV. Is I went to Jay Gingrich and I wanted to go through his nursery. And first of all, I wanted to pick out a bunch of trees for me to buy this fall to replace my dead ones. But what I really wanted to look for as much as anything, I wanted to walk up and down his rows and I wanted to look for fire blight, because he's got a bunch of these Andy apple trees that are in his nursery in pots. And he's got drip irrigation on each of these plots to keep them watered. And there's there's several hundred of these Andy apple varieties. And I wanted to see if there was any sign whatsoever of fire blight in that nursery. And I did not see a single tree showing any fire blight. So I flagged probably 25 or 30 trees. I'm not sure how many yet I'm going to need, but probably over 20 for sure. And I would just advise anyone, if you're going to plant trees in the future, apple trees, you guys, you don't want to lose your tree 5-10 years down the line. And that's what's going to happen if you get fire blight and you bought a tree from, well, basically from anywhere that's not a resistant variety. But I won't plant any apple anymore unless it's one of those from Jay, one of those Andy apples.
Well, the thing that sticks out to me is your friend out on the East Coast that has all these apple trees. This is his business, and he fights it. So for people like us that are not experts in growing trees, the little bit of extra money that this tree costs up front is just an insurance policy that we don't have to worry about these conditions happening when we're at work or we're out of town 5, 6, 7 years from now. I mean, because you mentioned that when this event comes in, it's all hands on deck. And what'd you say they spray these trees with like 130,000 gallons?
Well, he said that when these conditions happen, they've got 24 hours to react, and all of his helpers are there, and they got to spray that over 300 acres of orchard. And they're spraying it with some kind of copper solution. I'm not sure exactly what it is.
But to fight the fire blight.
Yeah, I think it kills the fungus. And he says they spray 30,000 gallons of spray in 24 hours to fight the fire blight. So he said it's his biggest nightmare. It's his worst problem in his orchard.
Well, I'm going to put some pictures Jay Gingrich posted today where they went through and picked apples off of some of the trees in the nursery. He posted some pictures of that I'll share they're on the Gingrich Tree Farm Facebook page, but I'll share them in the video feed as we're talking right here. But, you know, here's the deal. It's not like the tree can grow out of it. You could have a mature orchard and fight this down the road, and a little bit of money up front, you know, as much as we spend on our bows and our camo and hunting properties, it's like, why shortchange this part of it? But one of the things that we've gotten feedback on from the consulting clients or from listeners of this podcast is Jay sells out of his trees every year. But you and I have a meeting with Jay here in just a couple weeks. The supply chain has turned on, so it's taken a while to build this feeder system up for the trees. I guess our message today for everyone is, if you're wanting to buy trees, don't take a shortcut. Wait, because there will be a supply this year, and we'll figure out a way to get pre-orders and all of that kind of stuff. But you don't think that you can't get one for next season and go buy something different. Pay a little bit and get an insurance policy on these things.
Yeah, another thing about fire blight is it's way worse on pear trees than it is apples, and I've seen that on my farm too. And you know, my client out on the East Coast said the same thing. It's worse on pears than it is apples. I don't believe that I will probably plant another pear tree on my farm. I've got several, so it's not that I'm against pears. I think that deer love them every bit as much as apples, maybe more. But I've got several of them growing. I'm getting to the point where I want to stop planting trees. So at this point forward, I'm basically replacing trees that are not making it.
Yep.
I need to replace a few persimmons next spring, and I want to replace these apples this fall with these potted apples that Jay's got. And the thing about, you mentioned that his help has been picking the apples off of these trees. These trees, in these pots were bare root this spring. They have just been put in the pot, and they are already producing apples as they were bare root.
It's amazing.
And he said there was one of those little trees that had 37 apples on it.
It's unreal.
They're picking them off because they want that tree's energy to go into branch growth instead of into fruit production. And
Right.
then once they get established on your farm, then you just let them go and let them produce their fruit. But he has a bunch of fantastic looking potted apple trees that'll be available this fall.
All right. Well, again, we will share more information in the coming weeks. When I'm in town for the Real World Dealer event, we're going to go over and meet with Jay, and together we're going to figure out how to use the podcast to kind of inform people, whether it's going to be pre-orders on his website, or I'm not sure what the process is going to be, but we will share those details with everyone here in the coming weeks. So make sure you stay tuned for that. I don't know. I just think it's a no-brainer. Out of everything that we do, this is one product that's going to be there beyond our years. So why take a risk on it?
Yeah, the money you save at the local farm discount store to buy a fruit tree, what good's that do you 5 years down the road, that tree's dead?
Yeah.
Buy one that's going to survive.
And for those of you all thinking that we only talk about Jay's trees, the video that dropped Monday this week, where you're going around looking at your orchard and the damage that's there, you actually gave some other varieties of apples that you recommend that aren't there. But when it comes to this, I mean, I don't think either one of us are ever going to plant anything other than Andy's trees through Jay.
Nope. I will fill out my orchard with those, and once I get these orchards fully established and these trees survive, then, which I have no doubt they will, my tree planting days are about over on this farm. Maybe if I'd buy another piece of property, I'd plant more, but get things going with the right trees and let it go. I mean, it's cost me 2 years. It was last spring that I planted those trees, so I lost last year, and I'm losing this year's growing season, although I'll get to put them in the fall. Me not being as careful about the variety selection has cost me 2 years, and I'd sure hate for it to be 5 or 10.
Right. All right, well, let's move on to the 360 Blinds hot seat question. Make sure that you're checking out the new 360 blind. The guys from 360 are going to be on my property here in a couple weeks installing my Chasing Giants blind. We're going to do a video on it so everybody can get an up-close look at the metalwork around the windows and then all of the features, but actually show this thing going up on my farm in a new area that I've created for it. But Don, the Higgins hot seat question is not really a brain buster. It's just more of a memory thing for you, going back in the archives of all of your projects over the years. And the idea came as I was talking to Wes Delks today, and Wes said that they had 3.5 inches of rain over a very short period of time, and he lost a soybean field that was underwater, so he's going to have to replant. So thinking back through, we're at June 9th when this airs, thinking back through all of your projects, your consultants' projects, there's still time to plant food plots. What is the latest you've ever or seen food plots like soybeans planted that they can still have a decent growing season pending the weather?
Well, you can still plant soybeans into early July. I mean, they double crop soybeans here in my area after they cut the wheat, and the wheat's usually cut around July 1st. And then they'll come right in and typically no-till soybeans right into the wheat stubble. So you could go into early July with soybeans. Now, I personally have never done that. In fact, this year is probably about as late as I've ever gone. Typically, I'm trying to get my soybeans in at the 1st of May.
Yeah.
But this year weather wouldn't allow that to happen, but I got a good stand coming on, and I'm guessing that they probably won't be quite as tall as they would get if I'd have planted them a month earlier, but there's still going to be plenty of soybeans in my plots.
So another question that we get a lot of times when people look at the Real World Standard Gen 2 and the Northern Blend, and they look at that map on our website, and they live right on that map, and they say, which one should I plant? What's your advice for that?
Well, if they live right on the line, the dividing line between the Gen 2s and the Northerns, it really comes down to planting date. If they get, the beans in early, then probably the Gen 2. If they're getting them in later, like now, definitely want to go with the Northern. In fact, now I would probably move that line down south a little bit further just because we're well into June at this point. But if you're right on the line, you could also even, let's say you needed 4 bags of the beans, buy 2 Gen 2s and 2 Northerns and mix them together in the planter and plant them that way. Sure. And then you're sure that some of them are going to have beans on them, bean pods. They'll all have bean pods, but what you want is for that plant to be mature by the time the first frost hits. You don't want the frost killing a green plant that's got pods because the beans aren't totally formed yet, and from my experience, the deer just don't eat them.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it just came to mind this week. Wes is going to be doing some video of him going out and replanting some of his farm. It's one of those things. Sometimes it's happened to you when your creek's gotten out of your bank and you have to go back in and replant.
Yep, it's happened to me before.
All right. Well, let's take another break from Midwest Land Group, and we'll come back with our listener-submitted questions this week. Again, follow Midwest Land Group on social media and visit their website to see what job openings they have in new states that they're expanding in. They're still looking for quality agents and brokers that can kind of be an extension of what the core values of Brian Kraft is. And we really appreciate him and his partnership with us and support of Lester's Feed over the years. So we'll be right back.
Don't risk your most valuable asset with a part-time agent. Most real estate agents are part-time, working another job, trying to scratch together a few extra bucks in real estate as a side gig. Their inexperience will cost you thousands at closing. Not at Midwest Land Group. They only hire full-time professionals. Their agents are passionate about the outdoors, highly trained, and committed to maximizing the value of your land. If you're interested in selling your land, don't risk it with a part-time agent. Visit MidwestLandGroup.com.
All right, the first question comes from Matt Gardner from Morton, Illinois. It says, "Hi, Don and Terry. I enjoy listening to your podcast on a weekly basis and gaining as much knowledge as I can with all things deer hunting related. My question is regarding planting of trees. I stopped by my local Walmart recently that gets in chestnut trees each spring. I was surprised to find them marked down to $15 a piece. At that price, I bought as many as I could that would fit in my vehicle. I have brought them home and already given them a spray of Mike's Mighty Micros to help them out. With us going into June and my farm being an hour away, I wanted to get your opinion as to if I am better off keeping them at home where I can water them and care for them much easier and then plant them in the fall when it is a better time, or would you recommend I get them in the ground as soon as possible, knowing that we are going into a drier season and I won't be able to water and care for them as often. Once I do plant, I plan to use Mike's Mighty product to mix in the soil with them. They are currently in 3-gallon containers. If I keep them at home, I had thought about moving them to larger containers and adding some of the mix now as well. Would appreciate your advice on this. Thanks for your time. God bless. And here's to good velvet pictures this summer." Matt, if it was me, I would, of course, I'm not 2 hours from my property. I'd go ahead and plant them and mulch them real good. I don't know how often you can get there to water them, but if you could take a tub, like a old cattle mineral tub, or even a 5-gallon bucket and sit right next to each tree, put a brick or a big rock in each one of those so it don't blow away, and then drill a hole in the bottom of that tub right towards where it sits next to the tree, and you can fill that tub full of water and it'll slowly leak out that hole. Use a small hole like a 1/4-inch drill bit, and that water will slowly leak out. I've done that a lot of times on my farm. You can put a lot of water in there and have it leach out a whole lot slower that way. If you are going to keep them in pots, you definitely need to bump them up to larger pots. Otherwise, those roots are just going to circle around the edge of those pots, and that can be a real issue anyway. I guess it's your call based on how often you can get to your farm. If you could just get there once a month to give them a good watering, you're probably going to be fine. If that's not possible, then just bump them up into bigger pots and plant them this fall.
Talk a little bit about when a tree is in a pot and those roots reach the edge of the pot. What does that root do, and why is that a bad thing?
Well, instead they grow, outward from the tree. A root does, and if it's in a pot and it's growing outward, then it hits the edge of the pot. It starts to grow to the side, or starts to circle that tree instead of growing outward from that tree. And what you end up with is when that tree gets planted out in wherever you're going to plant it, it doesn't have a root system that's going to anchor the tree. So those roots will continue to grow in a circular pattern instead of outward to anchor that tree better. And I've had it happen on my farm. I can show you a tree right now that was an apple tree that was grown in a pot, had circling roots. I planted it. Tree got up to 6 or 8 inch caliper on the trunk, bigger tree. A windstorm came along when the ground was saturated with water in the spring and basically blew that tree over because the root system wasn't anchoring it. So when you plant a potted tree, you pull it out of the pot, and typically you're going to have a mass of roots that were growing against the edge of that pot. You want to take a utility knife and just slice from top to bottom every inch or two all the way around that root ball. And when you cut those roots, a new root will start behind that cut, and it will start growing outward. And you can break that cycle of that root system growing in a circular pattern and train it to grow outward again.
We need to remember to do a video of that to explain it for people next time in this fall when you plant your trees this fall.
Yep.
All right. I'll put the next question up on the screen for you.
The next one comes from Jody Hooks from Hartville, Ohio. It says, Don and Terry, thank you both for what you do with the podcast and sharing your testimony. I have owned my current property for 2 years now, and as I am improving the property, I realize how many does and fawns I have using the property. On my 56 acres, I identified about 9 does carrying at least 1 fawn with them going into January. I've heard it said hundreds of times that the does will use maternal aggression to kick the buck fawns out of the area in the spring. I've also heard it stated that if the mother is killed before she kicks the young bucks, the recruitment of that yearling buck is almost 100%. Since I have provided these does and fawns real-world minerals and constant supplemental feed for 2 years now, I should have the healthiest young bucks anywhere around me. What are your thoughts on shooting all the adult does this year that are carrying at least 1 buck fawn with them? I am curious what you both think about the pros and cons of taking every adult doe that comes across the property and allowing those young bucks to stay close. I have close family and a trusted friend that could help shoot these deer, and we never lack for the need of fresh ground deer meat at the local food banks. Thank you both. Well, Jody, I think it's a fantastic idea. In fact, I'm going to employ more of it on my property. I'm going to shoot more does, especially ones with buck fawns, than I have in the past, just because I got plenty of those does. So, we want to do everything we can to keep those bucks that have got the good nutrition, or came from does that have gotten good nutrition over a period of time. And the best way to assure that happens is to kill the mother. And, it just makes total sense. And I think it's a fantastic idea, and I would encourage you to do it. You're never going to be short of does. If nature doesn't have a vacuum, if your property becomes totally devoid of does because you shot them all, well, there's going to be more show up from the neighborhood as the local herd population kind of levels out across the landscape. So I think it's a great idea.
I've not done a good job doing this and need to do better. I actually purchased a Brenton 6mm arc for this reason alone. The benefit for me is I can use a suppressor during rifle season here in Kentucky. My farm doesn't lay out real well to harvest a bunch of does because no matter what you shoot, where you shoot, they run into your sanctuary if you shoot them with a bow. So we're going to have to use gun season this year to manage our doe herd. And luckily, since we can use the suppressor, I'm hoping that we can do a little bit easier job with that without as much intrusion on the property.
Yeah, last season me and my guest shot 8 does on my farm, some of those with a bow, some of those with a gun, and I can tell you that in the future, my doe management is going to be done primarily with a gun because I was shooting these does in the head and dropping them on the spot, and there was no tracking. They weren't running back into thick, heavy cover. They were dropping out in the field wherever I shot them. So that's going to be my weapon of choice for doe management moving forward.
Yeah, that is the one specific reason that I got that 6mm arc from Brenton. So we got some new Vortex glass on it. I have it all put together, but I haven't shot it yet. We'll have to get that done here this summer or this fall. So, good question.
Yep. So our next one comes from Anonymous from Berlin, Ohio. It says, Don, I attended the recent event where you spoke at Millersburg, Ohio. I just had to tell you that you did a fantastic job and delivered a message that touched a lot of us, and I am sure will impact some of the younger guys if they will follow your advice. I also want to thank you for the way you handled a couple of negative questions that were obviously meant as personal attacks on you and your Christian faith. You set a great example with your answers to those questions. Some of us were talking after the event, and we were wondering just what denomination is the church that you attend. You reach a lot of people and do a good job sharing your faith, so we were just curious about the foundation of your beliefs. You are making a difference. I wish every deer hunter could have heard your talk. Thank you for being so bold. Well, I go to a non-denominational church. We just believe in the Bible. If it's in the Bible, we believe it. We don't believe in adding more things to it, man-made ideas, and we don't believe in ignoring some of it. It's all God-inspired word, so we believe it all. We don't believe it's our place to add to it. So that's kind of my foundation. I was not going to use this question because I thought I did a pretty good job answering it the first time at the event, but the more I thought about it, there was about 300 people at that event, and there's a lot more than that listened to this podcast. So I thought this was an opportunity to just share a little bit more with a much bigger audience, because I know there's probably others listening that have the same opinion as the person that submitted either one, maybe both of these questions. Maybe it was two different people, I don't know. So without going into too much detail and just generally giving a general overview of the two questions that I was asked. So what happened at this event was everyone wrote down their questions. It wasn't people standing up in front of the mic and asking their question. Is that they were all wrote down. They were put in a box, and then James Hayden read those questions to me, and I answered. And so James and I were both on this little stage just sitting at this table, and he was reading the questions off, and he came to one, and I noticed him just sitting there looking at it, and he wasn't reading it, and he didn't know what to do, and so he handed it to me. And when he handed it to me, I looked at it, and earlier in the event, when we had a little break before the question session started, and I told the crowd to get their questions wrote down. Nothing was off limits. They could ask me about politics, religion, whatever, and I was fine with it. So I'm thinking about that in my head as I'm looking at this question on this piece of paper, and I thought, well, I did tell them to ask whatever they wanted, so it probably deserves an answer. And the first question was basically, at this event, I kind of shared some of my backstory. I think that actually Terry and I both have been kind of cast into roles as role models for a lot of young folks. And we get letters and texts and emails and messages from a lot of young guys that look up to us, and we never set out to be role models. I know I sure didn't, and I'm sure Terry didn't either. But it's a title or a platform or opportunity that's been presented to us, and I feel we need to make the most of it. So at this event, I was kind of sharing my backstory. I'm 61 years old, and one of the questions that I asked at this event was, how many people at this event have known me more than 20 years? And the only person that raised their hand was my wife. She was there in the front row, so she was the only person there that knew me more than 20 years. And then I said, so I'm 61 years old. Nobody has known me more than 20 years. So 2/3 of my life, you never knew me, never knew anything about me. Basically, you know what I've done in recent years. And a lot of young guys in this crowd look up to me, and even besides the ones that are in this crowd, but a lot of young guys look up to me and they think Don's got it made. Don's, he's got a company in the hunting industry. He's got a hunting farm where he kills these giant bucks. He's got a new house, and he's just got all this going for him. And I want to be like Don. I want to do what he's doing. I want to have the consulting business, and I want to do this. And my message basically told of some of my earlier struggles. And I'm not going to get too far into that here because I think it's a message that's better delivered live in front of a live audience, and I'll probably do it again, in the future. But I wanted to express to these young guys that look up to us that don't give up on your dreams, but you got to do things the right way, but you got to keep plugging away. My dreams didn't really come true until I was in my mid-50s when all this stuff really came together. I was well into my 50s, so it took decades of struggle for the person you see today. And I just wanted to give them hope and encouragement. And, I part of my message or part of my story was I told about, when I got married shortly out of high school, and the marriage did not work. It fell apart, and ended up getting divorced within a year of being married. And my first daughter was born out of that marriage, and I made sure that everybody knew that I considered that one of life's greatest blessings. And I did not blame my ex-wife. I said, both of us were probably too young and immature to be married. We was just kids, but a great blessing came out of that. And then when the questions came in, this question was, how do you consider yourself a Christian living in sin like you do? The Bible is very clear that if you divorce, you are not to remarry. And then the next question that came in, James looked at it and just handed it to me to do what I wanted with as well. That question was, it mentioned someone who's close to both Terry and I by name, who's in the outdoor industry. And it said, how can you guys associate and do business with this guy knowing that he's not a Christian? Because whoever wrote the question had the idea that this person is not a Christian. How can you associate with him? And so I was kind of put on the spot twice. And basically what I said was, as far as divorce and remarriage being a sin, I'm not going to argue whether it's a sin or not, but I will say that God can forgive all sin. It's not like Jesus died on the cross and said, my blood is to cover all sins, except for you guys that are getting remarried. You're not covered. You're done. You're doomed to hell. And John 3:16 says, for God so loved the world that he sent his one and only son so that whoever believes in him shall have eternal life. It doesn't say, except for you guys that got remarried, you're out, And the reason I wanted to share this on this podcast was I've had other folks who listen to the podcast bring up this same topic. And again, Terry and I have been cast into the role of role model. We got a lot of young guys listening to this. And I am absolutely not advocating for you guys to go out and get divorced. But if you're being taught at your church that this remarriage thing is absolutely, taboo and you're going to hell if you remarry, I'd like for somebody to show me in the Bible where it says remarriage is an unforgivable sin, because the Bible I read says that God can forgive all sin. I think the only unforgivable sin is blasphemy against the Holy Spirit. And that's it. So in regards to us doing business with non-Christians or hanging out with non-Christians, who did Jesus hang out with? He didn't hang out, with the saints. If he was to come and to our country today, do you think he would be at the country club or at the White House or whatever? He would probably be in the streets of the ghettos ministering to others. How are you supposed to minister to others? How are you supposed to be a disciple and lead others to Christ if the only people you hang around are believers? So I didn't get that question or the gist of that point either. So anyway, I wanted to share that little message with all the listeners of this podcast, not just 300 or so that were at that event this week. Guys, I'm not in any way, shape, or form advocating divorce and remarriage. But at the same time, you got to realize that every sin is forgivable. No matter what you've done in the past, it can be forgiven. You just got to ask for forgiveness, and God loves all of us. The other thing I said was that, nowhere in the Bible are we commanded to be the judge of others. God will do the judging, not us. We are commanded to love everyone, judge no one, but love everyone. So shunning people, is that showing love? If you shun somebody because they've got remarried, they divorced and remarried, I don't think so. Should you shun someone because they're not a believer? I don't think so. And there's a lot of different denominations out there, and to be honest, I don't know the difference between a lot of these different denominations. I can't tell you the difference between a Lutheran and a Baptist and a Methodist and all those. And that's why we have chosen to go to a non-denominational church, because I just believe that in some of those denominations, and I'm not picking on anyone in particular, but in some denominations, I think there's too many man-made rules. I think man has taken it upon himself to add additional rules to the Bible, or they've chosen to ignore parts of the Bible. And again, not going to bash any religion whatsoever, any denomination whatsoever, but we've just chosen to go to a non-denominational church where they preach the Bible, the whole Bible, nothing but the Bible. Terry's fighting the urge to totally go off here.
I grew up in the church, and this is a hunting podcast, and I don't want to get off the rails on this, but I have seen so many hypocrites and so many self-righteous people stand up like this guy that wrote this question, and all I can say is you should be ashamed of yourself, because you wouldn't have the spine to get up in front of a microphone and say it, but you'll write it down and try to basically shame somebody else. But salvation through Jesus is given by grace. And I am so excited that my dad is going to teach all of us a lot about what this is really about in this Chasing Assurance podcast, because the foundation that our denomination is the Restoration Movement, which is exactly what Don said. It is the Bible and nothing less than the Bible and nothing more than the Bible. And understanding all of that, my dad is one of the highest regarded theologists in the country when it comes to this. But he talks like you and I do when we're talking about deer hunting about the Bible, to where it's very easy to understand. So people, we have to live our life to glorify God, and love is how God showed us how to do that. And for people to get up and judge others, and furthermore, the reference that they made about the friend of ours that we do business with, how does he know he's not a Christian? He's probably never met him. I doubt he's met him unless it was at a trade show. I just, folks, if you want to turn someone off to salvation and believing in God, act like that guy. If your goal is to not win people, act like that guy. Be judgmental, be self-righteous, and be a coward like that guy is. Because I guarantee you, he's got demons, he's got issues, and he's got sin, just like every one of us. So, the only perfect person was Jesus, and I ain't him, and I'm not perfect, and I don't claim to be, but he's a coward. I hope you're listening. You're a coward. How about that?
I'm glad you wasn't at the event, Terry.
I would have blown up. I would have absolutely come off my rails. It was a good thing I wasn't there. These people that claim they're religious and then get up there like that prohibits people like us from saving souls. How many people, countless people, have called you and said that guy was out of line. And those are church Christians that were turned off. Can you imagine somebody being in there that was on the fence about whether they wanted to be a Christian or not, and then they heard that guy? Yeah, you want to prohibit salvation and sharing the word and being a disciple? Act like that coward.
I do want to say that so many people reached out to me after that, at the end of that event and the next day, calls, texts, and people coming up in person after the event. Numerous people basically had a message similar to what you said, Terry, that the person was totally out of line. And I just want those folks to know that your encouragement keeps both Terry and I going. We appreciate you guys that offer us encouragement, so thank you for that.
Tune into the Chasing Assurance podcast. We'll set the record straight on what that guy is off his rocker about. Let's get back to deer hunting, Don.
That'd be a good idea. So the next question comes from Alex Grimm from Troy, Ohio. It says, Don and Terry, with all your consulting, what's the most common thing you see that's holding properties back from being good to great? Alex, we got this question at the event on Tuesday evening, and I did not hesitate. The thing that's holding properties back is human intrusion. Human intrusion ruins more properties than anything. And it doesn't matter even if you're doing habitat projects, that is human intrusion. That is the issue I have with these artificial water holes. I'm not against water holes whatsoever. If a water hole can be maintained full of water without a human going in to fill that tank with water, I think that is a fantastic thing. It's a great thing. It's another piece of the habitat puzzle that makes a property just a little bit better. But if you've got to go in and fill that water hole, that's human intrusion. And human intrusion, even when it's meant for something positive like that, is the biggest thing that ruins more properties than anything out there.
Absolutely. You know, it's intrusion's the same thing, but people try to hunt it when it every wind direction or too much and burn it out, which is intrusion, same thing. Mm-hmm. Different way of saying it. All right, last question. Let's get this one done. We wasted a lot of time on church.
This one comes from Brett Repking from Effingham, Illinois. It says, hello, Don and Terry. I enjoy listening to your podcast every week and the great information you provide. This question is for both of you. With spring prep and food plots behind most of us, depending on the weather everyone has had, what are your strategies, tactics, or tips for setting up cameras for early season and into the rut? I normally set up 8 or so non-cell cameras in early July on food sources and travel areas to food, then in mid to late August replace those with cell cams and move the non-cells to new spots and let them soak the rest of the year, and move my cell cams again to rut locations in mid-October. Just curious what your guys' take is on cameras and how you use them to your advantage. God bless. Well, Brett, both you and I live in Illinois, so we're not allowed to put any sort of bait or attractant in front of our cameras, so we got to get a little creative. In the summertime, I'm looking for the location of bachelor groups, and what I found over time is that these bachelor groups will summer in the same places year after year, and that's where I'm putting my trail cameras. Field edges are fantastic. I don't like to go in the woods where the deer are probably going to be bedded and bump those deer off, but you get those, if they're going to hit a food source like a soybean field or an alfalfa field, and you put a camera on the edge, you're going to get those deer at some point, and probably multiple times during the summer. They're just an edge creature, and even though they're out in that food 20, 30 yards or whatever, they are very likely to come by your camera. So in the summer, it's food sources. I'm looking for those food sources, and particularly when there's history of a bachelor group being there at that food source. Then I start moving my cameras a little bit earlier than what you've mentioned. Usually around Labor Day. Labor Day weekend is a big weekend for me to move cameras, and I'm moving them off of those summer feeding locations to fall rutting locations. Rope scrapes, for example, funnel areas, more in the woods, and things like that. And the reason I want to do it that early is around the time that bucks start shedding their velvet in 1st of September, those bachelor groups will start breaking up, and those bucks will start dispersing from that bachelor group to their fall range. And I want to have that camera there before the buck reaches his fall range. When he first shows up, I want to get his picture, and it helps me put the pattern together in case I want to hunt that buck in future years, because that breakup of the bachelor group does not happen all at once. It doesn't all happen the first week of September. It goes well into October, probably well into like the very end of October. So if I've got a target buck that I get his picture in velvet in the summer, and I know where he spends his fall, I want to know when he shows up on that fall range. That tells me when I can start hunting him. If he's not showing up in his fall range until the third week of October, and they repeat this, I mean, I talk about the same time, same place idea. That's exactly what's going on here. You know, that they're going to show up they're going to disperse from their summer range to their fall range at the same time every year. And if it happens to be the third week of October, I don't want to be in there hunting that deer, that location, the first week of October, or October 1st when season opens here in Illinois. I want to know when he's making that shift. And the only way I can do that is to have my cameras there before it happens. So that's why I moved my cameras the 1st of September, mainly Labor Day weekend. Most of them get moved. And that gives me that information. Rope scrapes, that's a great opportunity or a great time to get those cameras on those rope scrapes, and if you got a rope scrape in the right location, you'll get a picture of every buck on the property. So that's kind of in a nutshell my approach to using trail cameras.
You left one little thing out. I was waiting for you to say it and you didn't. In the summertime when you're doing inventory, if you can find an area that's had a bachelor group in it, put your camera down the row if there's a corn and soybean edge. So if you have this big field and half of it's in beans and half of it's in soybeans, point that camera right down the edge of that. And for some reason, those deer like that edge of height variation. I've seen you do that, and I've used that technique a lot and gotten a lot of pictures.
Yeah, anytime there's an edge, those deer are going to follow that edge, whether it's a woods meeting a crop field or two crops, especially a shorter crop and a taller crop. You could even have like an alfalfa field meeting a soybean field, and that's an edge that both crops are fairly short, but it's two different crops, and they will follow that edge.
All right. Well, that's all of our questions. Thanks to Midwest Land Group for sponsoring that segment. We're making final preparations for the Chasing Assurance podcast that's going to air. It's going to be Father's Day. Is that next week? Next week's Father's Day?
Yep.
So, yeah, maybe we can think of our best tribute to our dads. How about that? You and I can talk about that a little bit on the podcast next week. But what else you got cooking that you need to prepare for or do this week as we cook into mid-July or mid-June?
Well, I've got a couple meetings this week, and hope to get my tractor back so I can spray my soybeans, and I need to do some mowing, which I can do that with my other tractor. But preparing for the Real World Dealer event, I need to throw that out there. So June 26th, 27th, our dealers will be coming to Arthur for a dealer event. If there's anyone out there that has considered being a Real World Dealer in the past and still has interest, place your first order and pick it up at that event and attend the event, and love to get to know you and just show you what we're all about.
Yep, and I will add, you and I will be with Mike Mitchell learning a little bit later before the next podcast comes. So if you have a question about the science or the application or anything that has to do with Mike's Mighty Micros, leave a comment down below, and we'll try to get those questions answered while we're with Mike, taking a tour of his orchard and his store. We'll do some video stuff for Chasing Giants TV while we're there, but outside of that, for those of you who don't like the religious side, hope you didn't get too frustrated with us as we got off on a little bit of a rant, but it's part of who we are, and we're not ashamed of it. So for all of those who continue to support us and show us love like you did, Don, after that event, you don't know how much that lifts us up and supports us when some days we just aren't really too excited about being in the public eye.
Yeah, that's for sure. If it wasn't for the supporters, we couldn't continue to do it. We wouldn't continue to do it. So thank you to everyone who offers us support. And God bless. We'll see you back here next week.
Stay tuned for Harold Monk doing the Sunday Night Prayer Time. And then again, Joe Miles and Bobby Worthington, woodsmanship from the Shipshawana show this last February. Take care.
Chasing Giants has been brought to you by Osseo Camo. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode of Chasing Giants.
That's what this book, this holy, sacred book is about. God's spoken. He has revealed himself. So when a question of faith comes up, we ought to go to the Bible. When a question of morality comes up, we ought to go to the Bible. When a question of fellowship comes up, we ought to go to the Bible, because it's there in this inspired, infallible, inerrant book that we have an authoritative voice from heaven.
Good morning from southern Louisiana. It's a great day. It's 85 degrees today. Going to be up to around 100. Great day to cut the grass, do some sweating, and just being outside in the presence of God is just a great thing. I want to talk to you about a Sunday school lesson I prepared a couple of weeks ago called Chasing Giants, believe it or not. Some of the giants that we chase are spiritual. Some of the giants that we are up against are physical, emotional, and how we deal with those giants that we come in contact with is very well documented in the Bible. I want to talk to you a little bit about that this morning. Proverbs says, that we are to trust in the Lord and not lean onto our own understanding, but in all our ways acknowledge Him, and He will direct our path. And it did not say that He will remove things from you. He said it will direct your path. And under the Hebrews, if you read it in the Hebrew language, it basically says as you're walking, He will guide you to the direction you need to go. Not that we're going to just sit here and He's going to move it, but there's some kind of action on our part that we have to do. Got a good friend of mine that's going through some giants in his life. And I asked him the other day about what is he doing, and he said, well, I'm praying about it. And I said, well, and he says, well, I've been praying and fasting and praying more. I said, I pray 3 or 4 hours a day about this problem. I'm going, and that's all he does is pray. And I told him, listen, until we make a step and we take actions on our own, God cannot help me. Not to say that God will not move a mountain for you, but it takes an action on our part. For instance, Noah, when God told Noah to build a boat, the boat didn't appear. It took Noah many, many years and generations to build this thing. And when it was finished, when Noah got inside, God closed the door. He was waiting on Noah to build the boat. He didn't build the boat for him. The miracle took place when Noah decided to put that axe in that first tree. The miracle started. As another example, let's take King David. When he went to his brothers and brought them some food while they were fighting the Philistines, he encountered this giant there, the Philistine war champion. And it's funny if you read the Hebrews the way it was, the Hebrew language the way it was written, is that they've been standing off for months. The Hebrews at that time, the Jewish people were very religious, so they did their chants, and they did their temple worships, and they did all this stuff. But the Philistines was still over there. God didn't move those Philistines. Now David comes along, and he looks at that situation, and it says for several days nothing happened. He probably prayed with his brothers over it, what have you. But there was no miracle there. The miracle happened when David decided to pick up a stone. He reached down into that creek bed and picked up that rock. And it's funny, it says he picked up 5 rocks. Tradition says that Goliath actually had 4 brothers and cousins there. So David said, I'm going prepared. So David reached down, and when he picked up that rock, the miracle happened. God took over at that point. See, and I was trying to explain to my friend is that God did not need David to remove the Philistines. He could have done that without a miracle. But he waited till someone trusted him enough, said, I'll do it. and took action and stepped forward, picked up that rock, and that's when the miracle happened. And so what are you waiting for in your life to happen? Are you waiting and praying for something? I think God never will never forsake a Christian person who is seeking and doing for God. You know, what do you need in your life today? Do you need a miracle? Well, then step forward and go start that path. Remember what I said? He will direct your path. You got to get in motion here. What are you doing if you're financially in trouble? Get going. Don't pray for the miracle. Get started and the miracle will find you. I think that God will always honor honest intentions to honor him. And I told someone the other day, just get moving. God will direct your path. You've got to be active. You can't sit. And my father always said, the back row Baptist, you can't be a back row Baptist. Get on that front row. Get to moving. And God will bless you beyond your wildest dreams, because that's his job. He is in the healing and the giant moving business. Thank you. And let's have a quick prayer right quick. Father, just thank you for the day. Just thank you for your love and the nature that's around us and the birds that are singing. You know that it cheers our heart to know that you're in control, and that the little things that we take for granted are just miracles around us. Father, we all face giants, and he's always the giants in front of us telling us that we are nobody. But we are warriors in Christ that can take on any giant that steps in our path. Just be with us, Father, today and this week, that we will glorify you, and that we will be able to say to someone this week, how you doing? How's those giants doing? Get started, and let's move those giants out the way. Thank you, Father, for your salvation and sending your Son for us. We ask in Christ's name. Amen. Guys, have a great day in the Lord. It's time to get some grass cut. See you next week.